Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. In the name of Allah, the Beneficent, the Most Merciful, I'd like to welcome you, dear viewers, to another in the series In the Light of Islam. In this segment, we'll be looking at questions regarding Ramadan. I greet you with Islamic greetings. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. May Allah's peace and blessings be on each and every one of you. The first of the questions which we'll be looking at today from Sister Sajda, she asks concerning excessive bleeding in Ramadan. Say if a person cut themselves and were bleeding excessively, would this break the fast? I imagine that her sister is questioning this because of the fact that we know that if a woman's menses begins in Ramadan while she's in a state of fasting, it will break her fast, and maybe she's seeing this kind of similarity. Now, if the bleeding was bleeding from her body, from her private parts, which is related or similar to that of menses, if it was outside of the time of menses and not really considered to be menses, what we know as istihada, then this does not break her fast. If a woman bleeds outside of her period of menses, it doesn't break her fast. So naturally, if a person were to cut themselves and they were to bleed, obviously that will not break the fast because that really has nothing to do with menses. Furthermore, people mistakenly think that this bleeding may also break wudu. If a person brushes their teeth after making wudu, perhaps, and maybe are a bit rough with it, and then some blood comes in their mouth, they're under the impression that they must now make a new wudu, new ablution. But in fact, this is not the case. Bleeding while in a state of wudu does not break wudu. We have many examples from the time of the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ and his companions, wherein they prayed with cuts that blood was still coming from. There are a number of records found in both Bukhari and Muslim where these clearly indicate that bleeding does not affect the state of wudu. The second question, which is one from Sharif, he asks, if Sadaqatul Fitr is given after Eid prayer, is it acceptable? It is acceptable as general charity, but it is not acceptable as Sadaqatul Fitr or Zakatul Fitr. These terms are interchangeable. That compulsory food which we should give at the end of Ramadan. And I mentioned that it should be food, because this is what the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ gave. And we should only give money if we're giving it to somebody who's going to buy food to give. But to just give money to the poor, this is not in keeping with the Sunnah. Though it is the opinion held by some scholars that it is permissible, when we look at the actual evidence from what the Prophet ﷺ said and what he and his companions did, it was always food. And money was available in the time of the Prophet ﷺ, but he specified that Sadaqatul Fitr should be given from barley, from wheat, from raisins, different foodstuffs, what we understand to be the staples of the various locales. Now, the Brother Sharif goes on to ask, is it acceptable also to give Sadaqatul Fitr from the beginning of Ramadan? Sadaqatul Fitr should be given prior to the Eid prayer, just before going to pray Eid. It becomes compulsory at the time of sunset of the day, the last day of Ramadan. From that point until the prayer of Eid, we may give the sadaqah. This particular Sadaqatul Fitr, this is the preferable time. It doesn't mean that we cannot give it a few days before, as it was the practices of the companions of the Prophet Muhammad, may God's peace and blessings be upon him. Some of them used to give 1 or 2 days before, but not at the beginning of Ramadan. This is stretching it back too far. 1 day or 2 days before to give, to avoid not, forgetting or something like this in the rush at the end of Ramadan, you forget to do so. 1 day or 2 before, this is permissible. But to stretch it way before, this is not really allowable in Islam. Another question we have now from Brother Medani, writing from Dubai. He writes asking concerning a marble mine. He said, Dr. Bilal Phillips, me and my family, we have a marble mine. How should we pay zakah on it? Should we pay on the value of the mine, or should we pay on what we have sold? In terms of the zakah which is given on things like mines, etc., or even, for example, on anything whose value is not determined, it's not determinable exactly. What is the value of this? This is in the ground. You think you have so much. You don't know. If you dig, you might find you have less, or you might find you have more. There's no zakah on this. We give the zakah when we have sold, because now it enters into the area of business transactions. When we have sold our product, and we now have cash in hand or kind, the value of what we have now in our hands, this is what we are required to pay zakat on. And this is, of course, the zakatul mal, the money which should be paid 2.5% on our surplus wealth, which we have held for over 1 year. Not at the time we receive the money do we have to pay, but after we have not used it for a period of a year. So it's our surplus wealth. Money is taken from our surplus wealth, and not whatever we obtain on a monthly basis or whatever. And this question, of course, is significant in the sense that many people choose to pay zakah during Ramadan. It's not a requirement. We can choose a point in the year, and we give it regularly at that point. Ramadan is a time when we know that good deeds are multiplied in their value, so people tend to leave their zakat to be paid until the month of Ramadan, which is perfectly permissible. A question now from Sister Nazli. She writes, Dear Dr. Bilal, is it permissible for us to use eye drops or ear drops during the daylight hours of fasting in Ramadan? The question here is arising because of the fact that when a person puts drops in their eyes, they have a taste of it in the back of the throat. There is a connecting passageway. Of course, things put in the ears, not really, although there is a connection between the ear and the throat also. However, substances which are put in these two orifices are not considered as substances which will break the fast, because what breaks the fast is the act of eating. The act of eating, feeding ourselves. If a person got an injection, for example, against smallpox or, whatever, some disease or something they're giving vaccinations for, this doesn't break the fast, because we're not eating when we take these things. If a person, though, is exhausted or weakened, and they are now put on a saline drip, given glucose where it's going into their veins, their body is now being fed. See, this is an actual feeding process here. This would constitute something which breaks the fast. But anything other than that, less than that, where it is an issue of just injections, a person who has to take insulin, these type of things, these do not break the fast. We have a further question here from Muhammad Sharif. He writes asking Dr. Bilal Phillips, after the adhan of Maghrib, the prayer usually commences around 3 minutes thereafter. However, in Ramadan, it is delayed till about 15 minutes. Is this a correct practice? The principle of delayal for prayer after any adhan is that the Prophet ﷺ said that between the adhan and the iqamah are 2 units. Time should be there for 2 units of prayer. That is the minimum. Of course, in the case of Maghrib, because of the fact that the time for the prayer of Maghrib is from the setting of the sun until the redness leaves the sky. So you only have about 20 minutes in which the prayer should take place, the preferable time, although it may extend all the way up in terms of actual time in which to pray until the adhan of Isha. However, the preferable time is before the redness leaves the sky and the stars come out. This is on a clear night, obviously. So, while we would have to give some consideration in the case of Ramadan, because people are breaking their fast after the adhan, that we don't have to do the prayer as quickly after as we would normally do in the case of months outside of Ramadan. We may delay, say, 10 minutes or so. We shouldn't, of course, be excessive in that delay, because I think this is usually a product of cultures wherein people have developed the standard practice of eating a full meal before going to pray Maghrib, which is really not in keeping with the Sunnah. So the preferable way is really to only delay for, say, 5 or 8 minutes, allowing a chance for people to break their fast in their homes and come to the masjid, because not everybody necessarily will break fast in the masjid. As in many mosques in various countries, they will prepare some things for people to break fast actually inside the mosque, just some dates and drink. So it is permissible to delay, not to be excessive in that delay, but to delay taking into account the needs of people due to the breaking of the fast. Similarly, it was well known that Prophet Muhammad ﷺ used to delay prayers, delay the Isha prayer in particular, allowing time for people to get to the masjid and to fill the masjid. So there is room in Islam to give certain consideration for special circumstances. I mean, we may even find in a particular area, because all the people who work in that area, their job doesn't finish until a substantial time after a given prayer period, like, for example, the time of Asr or the time of Dhuhr, and everybody's not, though Dhuhr maybe at 12:30 the adhan is given, the people don't get off work until 1 o'clock. So to delay it and make the prayer at, giving them time, say 1:15, I mean, it is permissible for us to take into account the circumstance of a particular area. Our viewer continues to write, asking, regarding the muaddin, should he break fast before the adhan or after? This is somewhat of a tricky question, because it is his responsibility to inform people that it's time to break the fast. Now, if the time he spends in giving the adhan, he delays breaking the fast. And Prophet Muhammad said we should hasten to break our fast. So, taking into account the Prophet's recommendation, may God's peace and blessing be upon him, that we should hasten to break the fast, he should break his fast with a few days first, lightly, and then he makes the adhan. With that, dear viewers, I'd like to thank you for being with us in this segment of the program, In the Light of Islam, and that you will continue to follow the program and benefit from the various questions which have been asked by our viewers. And if you would like to share in the questions, you're welcome to write into me at Sharjah TV, PO Box 111, or to call me at the Islamic Information Center in Dubai, 358190. With that, I bid you all farewell. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.